Terry asked me to talk about both my experience as a leader in the industry and also about selling beer. And I'm going to kind of try to weave those two things together rather than kind of have distinct and separate things. And I think you'll see why as we go through. I love it when you ask questions. So for me, if you want to ask them as we go along, that's fine. If you want to hold them to the end, that's fine too. But don't be shy about just going ahead and asking me to say more about something in particular. So this is about, my 22 years at this. I also want to start by saying that I am not a brewer, so I will not be talking about technical things. I'm conversant in brewing. I know about DMS and I know, about particular things in our process, but I am not a technical person. So we won't get very far if that's where you start. So I like to start with this slide when I talk about New Belgium because I think probably most of you know that New Belgium, I am a co-founder. My then husband, Jeff Liebisch, really had this idea that he wanted to start a brewery. He's one of those classic engineer types. And Jeff did a trip through Europe on a mountain bike, and he decided when he went to Bruges Biertje in Bruges, Belgium, which is a fairly famous beer bar there, and it was the Blood of Christ Day, and so typically it was a Wednesday. Typically they would be closed, but because they knew there would be a lot of tourists in town, they decided to open. The regulars didn't know that they would be open. Jeff went to this bar, the owner was there, and he sat down, and this guy was just super enthusiastic on that particular day, and led him through a bunch of beer tasting of Belgian beers, and he came back to the US and said, I want to brew Belgian styles. And as a part of that, he'd been biking around Europe and found some beers that he wanted to try. So that's kind of our conception story. And I never want anyone to think, because now we have a news story, I never want to sort of rewrite history and cut Jeff out of that story. So there's the Jeff part of that story. And that's how that tire was named. And really, he was instrumental in the first 3 years that we took our beers to the GABF. They didn't have categories for Belgian style beers. So our beers sat in someone's office because they couldn't be judged because there was no place to put them. So you see now we've come this far. We were the first brewery in the United States to specialize in Belgian styles, and it was really not a part of the American craft brewing lexicon at that point. So I put this slide here because I said earlier that I will talk about being a leader, kind of New Belgium, and selling beer. And for me, everything we do is brand. Whether it's that we have human beings who answer the phone, whether it's our visually interesting brewery. I don't know how many of you have been to the brewery, but you probably have noticed that it has visual appeal or visual interest, because I think that's part of what connects us as human beings to things. Flowers outside, whatever it is, always serving food when we have guests, because we think that beer and food go together and we don't honestly want people to get too drunk. All of that, how we show up with one another, whether we really love one another and extend ourselves to one another or not, all of that rolls up into this thing that we call brand. And that's the emotional connection between us and beer drinkers. And so when Terry says, tell us about how do you sell beer, I mean, we have a program that we use with our coworkers. It's called Red Cap, because at New Belgium, anything that's worth doing is lots more fun if you can give it its own name, that we train all of our salespeople to do. But essentially, I would tell you that the connection that your coworkers have with the culture and community that you build, and the connection that beer drinkers have with all the ways that you show up in the world, that's how you sell beer. Because that's that sort of loving act of co-collaborating, whether it's just drinking beer and having fun or whatever it is. So that's why this slide is here. So kind of back to our creation. When we started New Belgium, I was a social worker by training, and for me, it was really before we ever got this thing up off the ground, that we knew what we were going to stand for. So before we ever made a barrel of beer, we got together, Jeff and I went on a hike in Rocky Mountain National Park, and we made 4 core values and beliefs. And those were these here. I won't read them to you. I am embarrassed to say, you'll notice there's nothing about customers, and there's nothing about co-workers, because at that point we didn't have either one of those, and it didn't even occur to us that maybe we needed to be thinking a little farther out into the future. We were, you know, visionary in some ways in knowing that we needed to codify who we were, but we missed a few key details there, like customers and coworkers. But I would tell you today that we do all 4 of these things extraordinarily well, I think. I'm biased, certainly, and I don't generally like to say those things about us collectively, but I'm here to tell you about what it is that we do. So, and the point there is that if you have not taken the time to say what matters to us, who do we want to be, you guys talked about having, you know, a values proposition for your can van setup. I think am I looking at the, okay. Yeah. I only saw you from the side, so I'm seeing you straight on now. It's a really foundational and sort of core part of building community and brand. So if you haven't spent the time to do that, I would wholeheartedly encourage you to, because I can't tell you thousands maybe of times in 22 years that we've really been able to go back and say, okay, are we having fun? We have conversations all the time about, you know, what's fun about this. So I think that's pretty important. At New Belgium, we have since then, with all of our coworkers, devised sort of a vision structure. The vision is the bucket, and inside of the bucket lives our purpose. And in New Belgium, our purpose is to operate a profitable brewery, which makes our love and talent manifest. And it's simple, but it's not always easy. But it's fairly all-encompassing. Again, we're actually about to tweak it to add a little more customer focus to that as well. We've always been brewery-driven, and that makes us more probably internal than we ought to be. But still, that purpose, why do we exist on the planet at all, is pretty fundamental to who we are. We did our core values and beliefs again with our coworkers. We have 10 of them, and so they encompass more, but those original 4 are in there. And that was a process with, at that point, Aaron actually might have been there for a round of this, everyone at New Belgium, which is kind of how we like to do things. So we have a purpose, we have our core values, we have a mission, the thing that we're going to stretch ourselves to do over a period of time. We have a bunch of areas, but what we call perspectives that we use to kind of focus our work. You're not going to see those for long enough to know what we're actually doing, but just give you a small taste of it there. And then this is a screenshot from our MotherNet. All of our coworkers can see this. I think you know at this point that we are 100% employee-owned. I own the largest block of shares in the company. My boys own the next largest block. There was a management group that owned a final block. Actually, the ESOP also owned a block almost as big as mine. And at the beginning of this year, we sold them the whole company. So we're 100% employee-owned. And for us, we were well suited to that because we've been practicing open book management for a long time. So for us, it was a really good strategy. And again, back to my board, they said, you should be thinking about company perpetuation, founder liquidity, succession planning when you don't need to be doing it. Not unlike that adage about you should borrow money when you don't need it, or you should find a job when you don't need one, because you're not under the gun. And you get to wander. We spent 3 years wandering down a lot of avenues, thinking about strategy, thinking about what's going to happen in the craft brewing landscape. A lot of people are my age. They've been doing this about as long as I've been doing it. something's going to happen in our industry around succession and perpetuation. And what my board was saying to me was, do this before doors are shut and you feel like you're forced into something. And it was, again, fabulous advice from them. So that was a little tangent. This is a screenshot of so every one of our coworkers can see all of our strategy, their strategy for themselves. I don't have a pointer here, but the My Initiatives piece, each person puts together a working strategy. My 21-year-old told me that one of his personal initiatives is to be more responsible. And I praise Jesus. I'm glad somebody's, getting with it with him, because I've tried for 21 years. No, he's a good kid, but that was a particularly appropriate initiative for him. So all of our strategy ties together in the company, which creates incredible alignment and allows us to sort of make sure that we're all headed in one direction, which, with energy, when energy goes in one direction, it's much more powerful than when it's, dropping off the side or, God forbid, coming back the other way. So we have found that really, really useful. These are my coworkers. We have a retreat every year. And in that retreat, they kick off the strategy process. We say, you know what the longer term goal is. You know what the 3-year goal is. Tell us what you think the 1-year set of priorities are to get there. And so we spend a whole day at Planet Bluegrass, which, for those of you who are familiar with our local flooding situation, this was totally underwater. This building was totally underwater, and that's a 20-foot tall building. So it's a sad thing for us in this area, and I hope the guys who own it are fabulous. Hopefully they'll be able to pull that back together. But for New Belgium, every year we gather our tribe and we say, what are we going to focus on in this coming year? And you guys are, low to the ground. What is it that you want us to work on? I tell you all of this, the whole story there, because I was asked to speak about leadership. I can't really say how my leadership came to be in the industry, but I can tell you that it absolutely starts with having a solid practice of leadership in my organization. Because you kind of can't do one of those things like, yeah, I'm flighty and have no idea in one area, but now I'm going to be a leader in another. They're all integrated. And I work with incredible people. And I'll talk more about how I see that process. But they really inform us. And we then develop the strategy for the whole company through this process of co-creation on that day. We become masters of the clipboard. We have 500 coworkers, so that means we have 500 clipboards, because everyone is like their desk for the day, and we do lots of facilitating with small groups all over the grounds, so it works out really well for us. So I'm going to move into sort of how I see that practice on a more personal level and what I've learned in 22 years. And if you have other questions, feel free to raise your hand and ask them. One of those is say yes. There are certainly different styles of management, and mine is very collaborative, which is probably more of a feminine characteristic. I have a lot of masculine characteristics too. I swear a lot. I really am interested in people, I say things like, I will kick your ass if you do that again. So, I try to really make sure that we're powerful in what we do. But one of the things that I really like is that feeling of co-collaborating when you're working with people and you're coming up with the best idea because you've heard lots of people. And that's not to be confused with we're all going to make the decision. It's I want to hear what you have to say. Sometimes we're all going to make the decision, but sometimes I'm going to make the decision. And it's a really important thing to understand about leadership, is knowing who, ahead of time, before the decision is made, who's going to make the decision. Because if you're unclear about that, people are like, well, next time you want to ask me what I think, fuck that, because, last time you didn't do anything that I thought was important, and that means that we weren't clear about that. And another piece of this is knowing when to get out of the way. I work with incredible people who have incredibly great ideas. I don't have to love every single one of them. If they're on brand, if they feel like they're true to our core values and beliefs, I need to just get out of the way and let those things happen a lot of times. And they have more expertise. I can't be a subject matter expert. It's just way too hard to do. So it's really good to understand when saying yes is important. It's good to know when saying no is important too, but that's a much rarer occasion, at least for me in my way of showing up. Many of you may know Lauren Salazar. Lauren Salazar started out at New Belgium as Jeff's assistant, part-time. She was also making soup at Coopersmith, which is a pub down the street from us. And she now does a combination of, she is totally in charge of our wood beer program. Before that, she was totally in charge of our sensory program. Our sensory program has been identified as one of the most advanced sensory programs in the world, not just in the United States. We have brewers come from Germany, come from Asia, and they've said, we've never seen anything as developed as this. She did that all on her own. She's a social work major too. So you know, it's good to see when people really have this incredible capability and, like, you know, fan the fires of enthusiasm for them, because that's how you know, develop a group of people who can be employee owners and run with things. She's also taking on a new role, which involves sort of kind of management of our specialty beer practice, both in the trade and also at New Belgium. So she continues to, you know, set herself on fire every day and come up with new ways to really wow me. And she's not my direct report, but I do have a mentoring relationship with her where every couple of weeks we get together to just talk about what's going well, where the roadblocks are, those kinds of things. This is Tony Danza. I have no idea why we have Tony Danza, except that we have this process every year where people go through ownership, and we're big huggers at New Belgium, and at the end of it, you've gone through the ownership ceremony, and then it's kind of like a wedding receiving line. If you've ever been in one of those, it's like the event from hell. And we were finding that the hugging part was taking as long as the ownership ceremony part, like hours. And so someone came up with this idea of making Tony Danza with very large arms, where we could have one big hug. And the song is, of course, then Hug Me Closer, Tony Danza. So the point for me, kind of in addition to know when to say yes and get out of the way, is that it's good to have ceremony and ritual, whether it's for me at the BA, I don't know if staff, I would be thrilled to my toes. I'm guessing this is not going to be I'm not going to get the answer I want here. On the board of directors, we use thumbs. And it's a way that you get people, at the board of directors of the Brewers Association, it's a way that you get people to have to weigh in on something. Because you can have group situations where you say, okay, so we're going to do this. Everyone good with that? And a few people say, yeah, I'm good with that, and a few people sit there and say nothing. And the use of thumbs it makes people be active in a process. It is a shorthand way, ritualistic, community building, kind of ties us to one another way of building culture deep into an organization. And so whether it's thumbs or something else, certainly drinking beer is a way of building community and culture, and I love to drink beer, but I think it's important for us at New Belgium. It's important that our culture has more to it than just drinking beer. Another thing that has been interesting for me. When I went through a divorce, I had, I grew up doing this, but had little kids, and they were older, and I didn't have someone sort of saying, I'm not so sure about this beer thing. And it was really great for me because it enabled me to come back to our craft and really drive deeper into my own learning and also into the organization. We have always been innovative, but we're more innovative than ever after 22 years. And I always want to talk, to remind people of that, because it's easy to sort of say, yeah, we got this, and you have to kind of, continue to reinvent yourself all the time. I'm going to do it as, I wanted to show you just a little bit about our culture. This is the Fort Collins Tour de Bath. 25,000 people come to this. Probably more than 2/3 of them in costume. What's that? Yeah, that's a pretty good one too. So just a short clip kind of about, what our brand stands for and feels like for us. And the last one is just a picture of all of us together in front of the brewery for all of my coworkers at New Belgium. I want to say thank you for having me, and I'd love to talk about anything that you guys want to talk about.